Hello, and thank you for joining us at xm.com. This is the weekly outlook. We'll be having a look at the week ahead. I'm Christina Marujos, and joining me today is senior investment analyst Rafi Boyajian. Rafi, it's a rather quiet week, one would say, with two central bank meetings, though, adding some excitement for investors. But before we get into that, let's first have a look at data out of China. It's reporting trade data on Monday. The country has been recovering steadily from the pandemic, and forecasts are looking at a positive Monday report. How do you think the Aussie will move on the data?
So, Christina, that is right. So the data we've had out of China since its rebound back in March has been pretty encouraging, although the recovery is nothing too spectacular. It has been making steady progress towards a full recovery. And most recently, there was some acceleration in the PMIs in August, and the latest one coming up next week for exports, trade data. We're expecting exports to have expanded by 7.1% year on year in August. So that would be another positive signal coming out of China, and that may provide some support to the Australian dollar, which did get a bit of a knockback from the resurgent US dollar in the past week of its 2-year highs. So that could see the Aussie finding some footing in the coming days.
As we mentioned earlier, we also have central bank meetings this week, one of which is the Bank of Canada. It meets on Wednesday, and it's widely expected that it won't announce any change to policy. Given that the latest economic data out of the country show it is slowly emerging stronger from the virus crisis, how do you think the loonie will perform?
So Bank of Canada almost certain not to announce any new measures on Wednesday. So and as you said, we have seen a pretty strong recovery in the Canadian economy. We've seen a strong rebound in consumption, in employment, and more recently, because of course the Canadian economy is closely linked with that of the US, and there were fears that the second wave in the US would hurt the US recovery. That hasn't really happened. We've only seen the US recovery slowing somewhat. So that's positive for the Canadian economy. And on top of that, Canada is not seeing a re-escalation in virus cases like many other countries. So the outlook is really looking up. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the Bank of Canada is going to sound more optimistic. So if the Bank of Canada is unexpectedly dovish next week, regardless of the positive economic picture, another risk for the loonie is the fact that the Bank of Canada may soon follow in the footsteps of the Federal Reserve and switch their monetary policy framework to something along the lines of average inflation targeting, which the Fed recently announced, and that would mean that they're willing to let inflation run higher. Another option the Bank of Canada may consider is adopting a dual mandate. So either way, these are possible risks for the loonie in the long run. Of course, the Bank of Canada won't announce its decision on this until next year, but that's something which could potentially hold back the loonie even as the economic recovery gathers strength.
Staying on the central bank front, let's look at the ECB. It's also meeting this week on Thursday, and again, we're not expecting to see any changes in policy. The euro's recent strength, though, has been troubling some ECB members. Do you think the bank may signal anything to halt its rally?
On the face of it, the ECB meeting may appear to be quite a boring one because they're almost certain to keep monetary policy unchanged and not to announce any additional measures to their emergency lending programs. But there are quite a few problems that the ECB policymakers have to worry about now. So first, we are seeing a resurgence in virus cases across Europe. Daily virus numbers are actually worsening as we go along, and that could get even worse as we head into the winter and also as schools reopen across the continent. Another problem is that we just had August inflation numbers for the Eurozone, and we saw the Euro area entering deflation for the first time in years. So that's one big problem, one potential headache for policymakers. And the other one is, of course, is, as you said, the strong euro. The euro has been rising too far, too quickly. And it's going to be interesting to see what Christine Lagarde is going to say about the exchange rate, whether they are concerned enough about the exchange rate to make any strong comments about that just yet, or they will wait and see whether or not the euro appreciates even further. But one thing she will definitely be commenting on is the outlook for the euro area economy. So the recovery there has been slowing. So it's going to be very important to see just what language she uses about the outlook, about the recovery, and of course how worried they are about deflation and of course the euro. So all of that could really determine the next direction for the euro on Thursday when Christine Lagarde makes her press conference.
And finally, Rafi, let's have a look at Britain. Round 8 of Brexit talks resumed this week, but investors aren't very optimistic that the UK and the EU will manage to agree on an October deal. Given that GDP numbers for July will be reported on Friday, do you think the pound will have a bumpy week?
Well, most likely, yes, the pound will probably have a bumpy week. So the Brexit talks will enter another round next week, the round 8. So that gives you an idea of how long they've been going on for. But so far, they made little progress on the key issues, such as the fisheries and also on establishing a level playing field. So those are things that have yet to be negotiated. And even if they do reach an agreement on those key areas, whether or not they're going to be able to put together a complete deal by the end of October. So the end of October is seen as the most realistic date that a deal is possible, that a deal can be made before it can be approved by European parliaments and the UK Parliament as well. But time is running out, and so far it's not looking very positive. Of course, the EU is famous for making a deal at the 11th hour. So I think investors are still hoping out for such an outcome. But the closer we get to that end of October deadline, the more likely we're going to see Brexit headlines starting to have a huge impact on the pound, because so far, although we've had several Brexit rounds, they haven't really had the impact they used to have previously on sterling. And most recently, the UK data has started to have more of an impact on the pound, and we will have plenty of that next week. We've got on Friday the monthly GDP numbers coming out for July, as well as industrial output and manufacturing figures as well. So if we see the UK recovery gaining strength, then that will certainly help the pound, even if we do see some negative Brexit headlines.
Rafi, thank you so much for joining me today for the Weekly Outlook here at XM.com.